and welcome to etcfo.com. My name is Alik Shah. Today we have with us some of the top CFOs of India Inc. for a panel discussion on Budget 2024. What we will explore is what India Inc. CFOs want from budget. I have with me Mr. Sandeep Modi, the industry veteran and CFO of Hindustan Zinc. Hello, Mr. Sandeep. How are you?
Fine, how are you? And Happy New Year to all. And
Thank you.
good to have an auspicious day of today we, uh, without going into religious, but we have a Ram Mandir Pran Pratishtha. So I think congratulations to all of us.
I also have with me Mr. Anand Agrawal, the CFO of VMart Retail. Welcome, sir, to etcfo.com.
Thank you so much, Alec, and my esteemed panel, my friends here. So very happy to be here and look forward to a very meaningful discussion.
Another one of the fine CFOs of the country, we have Mr. Hemant Roya. Welcome, sir.
Namaskar. Thank you, Alec, and grateful to all of you all to be part of this panel and look forward to a great discussion.
Sure, sir. And we also have with us Mr. Vikas Wadhwan, Group CFO of PropTigers.com. Welcome, sir, to the ETCFO.
Hi, Alec, and good afternoon, everyone. Looking forward to a really insightful discussion.
To add the economist perspective, we have finance economist of India, Mr. Kunal Kunduve, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thanks, Alec. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be here. Lovely being among with you. So I hope to get some rather meaningful insights from your various industries that would also enrich me. So yeah, let's look forward to the discussion.
I will start with Mr. Hemant.
In general, I see a continuation of the last couple of years with a specific push on infra and a lot of push on digital. I see some incentives on EV. And I think at some point in time, they will also, my views, they will also, given that we have bid for the 2036 Olympics, that's going to be a tall order in terms of spending. So I do see some push there also.
Noted your points. Mr. Agrawal, what's your point of view with regards to the same?
So hi, I think first of all, this is going to be an interim budget. So basically, it's going to be a vote on account. So I'm not expecting any major significant policy changes or very major announcements. The model code of conduct for elections is also expected to be in force around mid-March or end of March. So although no law prescribes any clear guidelines for the budget that comes right before the general elections, but it can still take any shape. Having said that, if we look at the past interim budgets of 2004, 14, and even 19, they all included some noteworthy policy announcements like the extension of the subsidized food scheme, Kisan credit cards, reprieve for the auto sector, etc. So while any new large schemes may or may not be announced, some popular existing schemes could see expansion or extra resources being allocated to boost implementation rates, which may include housing, which may include health insurance, farmers' cash transfer schemes, because there's a lot of stress in the rural sectors. So just also the fact that it's going to be just before the elections, I'm expecting some popular, measures that the government should take to improve the livelihood of the common man and particularly the rural sector.
Meaningful points. So, Mr. Modi, how do you see this budget for India Inc? What are your expectations for India Inc from this budget 2024?
Why I largely echoed what Mr. Agarwal has said, that this is being an interim budget, no significant policy changes we can look at. But at the same time, given that it is an interim budget before the financial year, and this government has been known for the giving some of the good surprises, especially given the election year. What I believe that there is a widespread optimism as well that government will prioritize fiscal prudence while unveiling the initiatives aimed at for the fostering the economic growth. And based on the various analysts report, also it's coming out that government's announcement to invigorate the manufacturing sector and amplify the capital expenditure, which may lead to a good growth and foundation for the whole next year and for the year. It's because this government may focus upon that. If I put up such kind of budget, people will vote for them, so that one is the lucrative for the common man kind of things can be, a various schemes can be. But I think more from the industrious point of view, expectation in a general, I believe that PLI scheme should be basically extended beyond the 14 sectors which they have been telling. Secondly, this government has been in the last few years, we have seen the mining sector was not so much into the focus. And now I coming from the mining sector background, I can see a lot of policy changes they have been doing. And they want to, there is an aspiration, there is an ambition from the top that mining sector should grow from 1.2, 1.3% of the GDP to 4%, and that can change the whole game, the critical minerals, so many things are there. So I think government will focus something on this. The expectation will also be that rather than putting some timelines for the manufacturing company to come by March 24 and having the lesser tax or a 15% tax benefit, why not it should be linked with any kind of manufacturing or linked with the employment, and not with a separate company to be formed. A lot of projects are on the timelines being delayed. So that is one of the expectation I think we can all have. And while Mr. Agarwal said the EV kind of thing, I think there should be some EV incentivism, like it would have been earlier that X percentage you put and the 125, 150% deduction you get. Why not we should be do same for the EV sectors, especially for the mining sector? Lot of infrastructure EV investments are happening. I think some of the initial things I would like to say as we progress during the panel, but these are bit expectation, and this I believe that government will do something.
Interesting points. Mr. Wadwan, what's your take on this?
Thanks, Alak. I have a very similar take, and I think when we are talking about budget, we should divide it into two parts. One is this interim budget, which we are expecting on 1st of February, and then the full budget, which is going to come sometime in July, post the formation of government. I think in February, I echo what Mr. Anand and Mr. Modi has said. In terms of no major announcements are expected, because it is majorly a vote on account budget. But from a fiscal number for FY23 will be presented and are likely to be in line with the budget estimates on the back of robust economy, higher tax collections, and fiscal discipline which the government is following. Considering that it's certain in terms of election results, my feeling is government will continue its progressive budget and reformist agenda even in this interim budget, and they will continue to boost manufacturing, continue its infra push, and continue the reformist agenda. But there will be limitations in terms of what they can do in interim budget. But from a full budget perspective, I think there will be focus on rural economy, which still has signs of stress from a COVID perspective. Continue to drive better road connectivity and improvement in rail infrastructure, which will not only help reducing the logistics cost for businesses, but will also help boost rural economy. Localization of imports will continue to drive on the back of Make in India or on the back of PLI schemes, which government has launched. Development of value chain, which Mr. Modi was also talking about for electronics or electric vehicles, which are clearly priority for government of India and for the right reasons. I think the other area which I feel the government will focus from a full budgetary perspective is reduction of individual taxation on the back of expanding tax net, which the government is driving for the last few years. And this clearly is the need of the hour. And the real estate costs are going up, and the government should consider kind of increasing some of the exemptions given in real estate sector, like home loan interest rate capping and so on and so forth, to give a little bit of relaxation or relief to the sector.
Interesting. So Kunal, let me put forward you a very interesting question, which is like this is a budget just before the election. So as an economist, what worries you? What worries you from the point of the economy? Like what are certain things that should be avoided in the budget so that it is not just a populist budget, but it is for the benefit of the India?
See, in terms of what really worries me, purely from the economic point of view, One is, of course, its domestic consumption. Domestic consumption remains extremely weak, undoubtedly so. There are clear and visible signs of rural stress. Employment is definitely not going up. And for the large, the most populous nation in the country, I mean, this is something we are not being able to generate as much. So there are issues with employment, there are issues with wages. Data clearly shows that MSMEs are struggling, and I'm talking of struggling MSMEs in the formal sector. When I'm looking at the RBI data, corporate data on non-financial corporations, so MSMEs are struggling big time. So one can imagine the kind of challenge that might be there in the informal sector. So yes, I mean, domestic demand remains a big challenge, and I think this is something we need to keep in mind. It's not very easy to do that, given the kind of fiscal situation we are in. We have to go for fiscal consolidation. And remember, most of our even programs that are aimed at supporting industry, be it PLI, be it FAME or whatever, these are all end of this day subsidy driven. So there is only so much that the government can do. What is very critical, of course, and there's no gainsaying. I mean, the public capex has to continue. The important thing is to be able to invigorate private investment, specifically in non-infra sector. That is critical, and that is something we need to think about. So, in terms of pure worry, yes. So, employment generation, which is why I do hope and believe that the government would extend the PLI scheme to the employment intensive sectors. I think that would be quite critical, because when you're talking of infrastructure, when you're talking of construction, these are the most labor intensive sector in terms of their ability to absorb employment. I mean, agriculture is no longer the most absorptive sector. Of course, COVID turned it around. We have seen a lot of employment going to the rural areas, but what it has also led to is a high degree of disguised unemployment. Quality of employment has not gone up. So, which is why I think it's not just the focus on infrastructure, not just the focus on construction, but I think one good way of invigorating employment generation would be possibly extending the PLI scheme to the employment intensive sectors. But then again, government support cannot be ad infinitum, and the government has to go for fiscal consolidation. So we are expecting a target of between 5.2 to 5.4% of GDP in terms of fiscal deficit. So the government would possibly not go for borrowings which was higher than what was budgeted, gross borrowings budgeted the current financial year, and in the last budget. So they may not have a higher borrowing target. I think they would be banking more on the kind of buoyancy that we are seeing in the tax collection. But the downside of the tax side buoyancy, which not many people are talking about, is it is creating a lot of inflation. Because what we have seen, and one of the reasons for tax buoyancy, apart from the fact that we are seeing a lot of formalization of the economy, which is good, actually the indirect tax rates are very high. So talk of oil taxes, the excise taxes, they've reduced it a bit, but nowhere in comparison to the way the prices have moved. And this has resulted in a situation where there is a floor to where inflation can go down in terms of indirect taxes. Interacting around the 49th meeting of the GST Commission, the taxes also had been raised in certain important consumption goods. So these are also something we need to keep in mind. Because while we talk of reducing income taxes, I mean that's important. Of course, the middle class is really squeezed. But how many people, what percent of India's population actually pays income tax? I think a good way to try to reduce the tax would possibly be, to get a better handle of consumption, would possibly be in terms of having a clear and hard look at GST rates, rationalization of GST. Some taxes can definitely come down. I think so. So that is the hard balance that the government really has to ensure.
Very interesting perspective. If I now shift my focus to the sector-wise expectations of budget. So, Mr. Hemant, I will again start from you. What are the expectations of logistics sector? What specifically logistics sector is looking from this budget?
So I think that the push on infra, even in the vote on account, will continue. And I was also referring only to the vote on account in my earlier comments. So I think the push on infra will continue, and that's really going to help.
Noted. Mr. Anand, what's for your sector, specifically the retail?
While I can talk about the general things, but I first want to give a small context. See, what we have been seeing, and what Kunal also mentioned very clearly. If I go back to what Kunal asked in terms of the top three worries, one is the domestic demand, second is the employment, and third is the rural stress. And I think if I go across the table, whether it is mining or it is, infrastructure or logistics, eventually we will boil down to basic these 3 points for every sector. What we are very clearly seeing is a Giffen's paradox kind of a situation where the most common goods are getting the most, high priced. So there is high inflation in cereal, high inflation in food, high inflation in edible oils, which is killing the common man. Now, which is impacting every part of the economy. It has nothing to do only with consumer or retail. I think it is to do with everybody and every sector. And that is why you see the FMCG companies struggling, you see the two-wheeler companies struggling, you see the value retail companies struggling, you see the food companies struggling. And that is the backbone on which the economy is built. So we may not be agrarian economy any longer, but still we must understand that 60-65% of the GDP still is contributed by the common man, is still contributed by the rural sector. Now, unless this part of the economy comes under double, triple engine, growth, we cannot have a sustainable, blueprint for the future. We can keep talking about a lot of other things that we want for each of our own sectors, but I think it's the common man that really needs to get a uplift. And that is where, the ask is, one of the biggest laggards have always been the rural consumers and the lower, mid to low income households. Providing income earning opportunities to them through carefully strategized enablers such as development of tier 2, tier 3 towns as industrial hubs or service centers or capex infra investments in such kind of towns, that is going to really give the boost for the actual upliftment of the economy. Whether it comes as part of this vote of account budget or it comes as the regular budget, but that is exactly that is required. Now, if I look at the particular demand from my own sector, which I come from retail, now again, retail has seen a very strong dichotomy of sorts in the last 1.5 years, where we see luxury goods flying off the shelf and the common man goods still, common man struggling to come even to the market. Now that is again linked to the income generation potential, the income, disposability in the hands of the common man. And that is where the ask is around how do we streamline or strengthen the common man's economy. So to boost consumption, the one of the options is to develop, employment or employment opportunities in rural sectors or semi-urban sectors. But the other is also through efficient use of taxation and PLIs. So if you have capex, which is going into the tier 2, tier 3 towns, you have infra projects which is generating employment and not only creating GDP, but because important thing is to have a sustainable growth. So you have to have it more inclusive, more wide-based growth. And that is where the government has to really put in that effort, that how do we manage the taxation? How do we improve taxation policies so that more and more employment generating possibilities are created for the common man? So that is my ask, because that indirectly is going to help not only my sector, but every sector in general.
Great perspective, Mr. Agrawal. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Uh, Mr. Modi, I have a question for you. When we talk to CFOs in general, 9 out of 10 says that what keeps them awake is the compliance. So, from the point of view of the compliance, what are your expectations from the budget? What measures can be taken by the government to reduce the compliance or to promote ease of doing business?
So I would say, from the compliance point of view, GST has taken a long, I think, path, and in the last 7 years, I think this has gone through a lot of changes. A lot of compliance burden has already been removed, and I think whatever they are keeping, it is more from the protection point of view from the government. One of the issues which we face that from the vendor side, I think is a bit where I think every industry must be having the issue that when they raise any advance, like in our kind of industry, when we do a large project size, say XYZ company, and we pay large value of advance which goes to the millions of dollars, for the EPC contract, and the parties raises the advance invoice, and they can't raise the tax invoice, but they raise the advance invoice and charge the GST, and that GST we pay to the party and party deposit to government, but the person who pays, he can't get the credit because the goods or supplies have not been there till now until the rest of the projects happen. So I think this is the key ask from the point of view from the government, that why it should not be allowed as a credit to the party, and the government is actually enjoying on the, what I say, the interest free kind of thing. So neither it's a beneficial to the person who has paid nor the person who has got. I think that is the one thing. Secondly, in terms of the large companies or any small or medium, the CSR has been now mandated 2%. So why? And it has been clearly spelled out that CSR is the part of the business. It has to be done because the business has to be done. And since business is earning the money, and that's why the 2% contribution is happening. So it is a fail to understand why it can't be allowed as a deduction on account of the in the income tax. Similarly, from the CSR, whatever the GST is also charged, that is also not considered as part of the business activity, and accordingly it is also the credit is not there. So I am talking more from our point of view, because any large industry point of view, the amount runs in the crores of the rupees where there is a loss. I think that should be allowed. As far as other compliances are concerned, I think a lot of automation and digitalization government has made, but still the issues remain, like especially in case of MSME. I will talk MSME. Many times we have small parties are there, so there are two impacts. One is the, because of the MSME, I was also reading, and it also felt, because the payment has to be made mandatorily within the 45 days. Actually, it is impacting to the MSMEs, because they raise the invoice, some disputes happen, and they are not paid, and the compliance issue happens. So the parties don't want to give the business to the MSME. So I think that has to be seen holistically. And second, the smaller MSME party, they are not so ready with the infrastructure, small parties. So what happened? They are not able to, and they actually don't want that within the 45 days they should be getting. They are happy with the extended credit term. If say I Hindustan Zinc, we are working with 500 plus MSMEs since the Hindustan Zinc got established for 50 years. They don't have any issue, but still because of the compliance, we have to think or say, should I continue with this party or I aggregate to the some larger party? I think that also has to be seen, because there are many company private sector kind of credit queue. I will say this kind of nuisance party has been coming into the system based out of Jaipur, and anybody can go to them and register without verifying whether the party has been paid or not. And my number was given, and I get 500 calls during the day. CO's numbers are given. What actions government is taking against those? I have to go to the district court for filing the case against those kind of parties. I think MSME regulation needs a holistic view. I think government should leave between the both parties how they negotiate for the payment terms, because if the extended payment terms are there, obviously the party would have charged the interest. I think that should be left, rather than pushing that within the 45 days, and the compliance fairness should be there. I think these are the things. Other apart from this, I don't find any major change which can be done in the compliance. I think more is the protection from the point of the government's revenue, where the GST credit somebody pays and they don't deposit. I think that's all we can debate, but I think government wants to protect that. It should not happen X party doesn't pay and Y party takes the credit. I think more from the compliance point of view looks okay. A lot of regulations in the terms of income tax are there. Maybe we are waiting for the new income tax code for since ages. So at least I don't think this year it's going to happen. But if that happens, it will get simplified a lot, especially from the corporate point of view. While government can't control the SEBI, so-called, while they control everything, but they can't control SEBI, so-called, a lot of compliance burden has been put on the company. Any small penalty of 1,000 rupees, even a notice comes, we have to report to the SEBI. I don't know what SEBI is achieving by doing this 1,000 rupees. Especially, it put a very infamous to large kind of organization, when the media quickly, immediately captures that information, put that the X company, Falana company has got a GST notice of 1 lakh rupees, and I think someday media will start collecting all the information, say these are the company who has got the highest notices, without getting into the merit of the case. I think that's becoming a big issue. I don't know whether it can be resolved by the budget or not, but this is something we are daily facing. So one side people are forced legal and second to settle the cases. The other side, now they are fearful, if I settle the case, I have to pay this and then I have to report.
Very interesting, Mr. Modi.
I'll just add a little bit here on what Mr. Modi said, because I completely agree with him. See, I have been writing about the fact that MSMEs are facing a lot of stress given the compliance issues. See, for a small company, compliance is a big burden. The cost to them is very high. Now, when I'm actually looking at again the RBI data of non-financial companies in the listed space, MSMEs are struggling big time. Their share has fallen to multiple decade low. Their share in the total sales universe, in the non-financial space is at its all-time. And one of the things that, of course, they work on a pretty thin margin. And one of the things that challenges them the most is the interest cost. Now, one is they're losing business, as Mr. Modi said, because there's a fear whether they'll get a refund or not. So companies would prefer to do business with bigger companies. The other thing is a lot of money is getting stuck in the working capital, and that is also impacting them. So the interest cost has gone up, and which is why most of the companies are somehow surviving, mostly making loss. And this is something, while still being said, actually, it has to be taken up with a power footing, because at the end of the day, the MSMEs are among the biggest generators of employment. We cannot have a situation where they are not strong enough. They still remain the backbone of the economy. We need to have policies, well thought out policies that can also support. Of course, there are challenges. I'm not saying everybody is, absolutely fair and fine in doing the business. There are challenges, yes, for sure. But in general, should everybody be painted in the same light? Should everybody be construed to be a criminal, before really be, having the merits of the case in front of them? So I think MSMEs need some kind of support. I'm not saying fiscal support, but at least compliance and policy-wise, there should be some support to make it much more easier for them to do business. I think that's what I was trying to point out, and Mr. Modi rightly pointed that.
And just to, before somebody else, because MSME, one side is supporting to them. Second, the company should also be not, as Mr. Kundu was saying, should not be made. Like if I Hindustan say MSME overall payment cycle is 22 days, but one extreme MSME may get paid in 70 days. Then should be questioned why it is, rather than saying that no, you disclose that it has been paid more than 45 days and somebody report. So if the 99.99% is paid on time or before the time, there must be some reason, because also the opportunity should be given why, rather than something complaining and then people start raising the unnecessary bad name about the company. And because the person who has not got, he will always complain, and he will always say, I'm the holier than thou.
Great points from both of you. I will now come to Mr. Vikas. Vikas, like the compliance pressure, the compliance thing with Mr. Modi shared. Do you want to add on anything from your industry, from the perspective of your industry?
Sure. No, so I'll touch upon a couple of because a lot of interesting points have already been made. So I'll just focus on real estate industry and bring some perspective there. See, right now the real estate industry contributes somewhere around 8 to 9% of overall GDP. But if you compare it with the other economies, the typical contribution is somewhere around 11 to 12%. And if we have to take if we have to become a 5 trillion economy, real estate has to contribute significantly. So what do we need to do to enable that growth? So there are three different pockets or four different pockets where I'll put my recommendations on. And some of them may not be directly related to the budget, but this definitely should come under consideration in some form or the other from a government perspective. First is the fast-paced execution of the projects. I mean, in India, still a project from the conceptualization to the execution, it takes 5 to 6 years, which is pretty long a cycle. And it's not comparable with any other economy. I mean, look at China, where large-scale projects gets delivered between 12 to 18 months. That's the kind of comparison which we should keep in mind. What needs to be done for that? Obviously, I have few suggestions there. One is definitely single window clearance. Right now, the compliance burden on real estate sector because of a state and federal structure is immense. How do we bring single window clearance for real estate projects, which reduces the compliance burden, but also enable the fast-paced execution of the projects in real estate sector? Because at the end of the day, India needs a very, very large number of housing as well as commercial projects if we have to deliver the GDP growth which we are aiming for. So that's one piece. Second, access to capital. I think barring few top-notch developers, access to capital to real estate sector is still scarce. There are challenges. The cost of capital is pretty high. The government should look at it and see how we can solve that, because this is a hugely capital intensive sector, and that's where some effort is needed. And if the government does it, this will mean reduction in cost for execution of the projects, which means the housing is available at a cheaper rate, the commercial project gets delivered at a cheaper rate, which means the office rentals are lower, or the institutional projects are available much more economically, which will further boost the business. Second, I think if the real estate sector has to grow to that scale, the government should definitely look at how the real estate transactions are executed. It's pretty complicated right now. Obviously, again, for federal and state structure, I know the recommendation which I have is very complicated because of this dual structure. But at the end of the day, the government should look at some kind of a tech stack which is delivered by the federal structure, like UPI type stack, which is leveraged by the state governments to enable real estate transaction. Right now, the real estate transactions are so complicated, and then they are marred with a lot of litigations related to title and so on and so forth. A common man is not very comfortable with real estate transaction. If we have to go to millions of transactions in real estate every year, then we have to solve this puzzle so that all of us feel very, very comfortable doing real estate transaction, which are large in terms of the value involved in it, right? Then the next piece is while real estate contributes 8 to 9% of GDP, but it still doesn't have industry status. Once it gets industry status, it solves 2 3 problems. One, there is a concerted effort at the ministry level in terms of how to drive growth in this sector. How do we bring down the cost for this sector? It will enable the access to the capital for this sector at a lower cost. And this will also solve a lot of other related issues, which right now gets lost somewhere in the federal and state structure, right? The last piece which I want to call out here from a real estate perspective is the GST, which was called as One Nation, One Tax, unfortunately has not translated into One Nation, One Tax for real estate. The developers on their new development are required to pay GST, which is passed on to the end user, but they do not get input credit. There is definitely a loss of credit, and the end user cost goes significantly higher. Second, on top of it, they have a stamp duty implication. So the overall cost of real estate transaction goes very, very high. So I think some of these issues, the government should look at it closely, because this is one large sector which is definitely an engine for the overall GDP growth.
Very notable points, Vikas. Mr. Agrawal, do you want to add anything on this from the point of view of compliance, specifically regarding your sector, or you want to give a push to what Mr. Modi and Vikas said?
Both Sandeep as well as Vikas have raised very, very valid points, and I couldn't agree more. I just want to add a couple of things that I feel are also more relevant from my own sector. So one is around, labor laws. I think the complexity and the extent to which the kind of compliance burden that any corporate is subjected to once he is operating, pan India is unbecoming, is absolutely mind-boggling. The number of laws that one needs to comply to, the number of returns that one needs to file, the number of a full-fledged compliance tool, even if you want to implement, it's mind-boggling the number of compliances that you need to comply just to be in business. If you really want to comply with everything, you can't do business. So there's a lot of issue that needs to get sorted, and I think from a very practical experience, we have just set up a new warehouse here in Manesar in Palwal around a year back, and it's taken almost 1.5 years just to get it operational after the building has been made ready. And even now, there are so many things which are still pending in various government departments to get clearance from. So it's absolutely, you make life difficult for business not to grow. So you're not making it ease of business, you are making it really how not to make business grow. One is that. Second is, also around, the refinement of the Provident Fund and the ESI schemes. I think there is still a lot of work that needs to get done in getting these two things slightly more synchronized and more, easy for not just the employers, but also for the employees. There has been a lot of effort that the government has done in the last probably 5 years, but still a lot still is desired. Thirdly, I think, especially for listed companies, there's a lot of compliance. I think Samir also mentioned something about the disclosure norms that SEBI has put in. I think there is still scope for doing it slightly more better, putting it a bit more mind around thresholds, putting a bit more effort around how to make sure that actually it serves the purpose that it is designed for. Not just having a regulation in place, but really realizing that how much effort and what is the end benefit that each word that one writes in any circular or in any notice, what it really means. I think then from a taxation point of view, Vikas mentioned about GST, one nation, one tax. I think we've begun on a good note in the last 5 years, 6 years, but I think there's still a lot to be desired. I think the government has done a fairly good job in reaching wherever we have reached, but I think we should move towards one rate as well. So while we have plethora of rates, but I think it will be far easier for everyone, including the business, if we have more uniformity around rate structures and how do we manage the rate structures in future as well. I think MSME, there was a lot of discussion that Sandeep and Kunal had around MSME, and I fully agree to what Sandeep said. This is not a space for reservation. So we have seen in multiple areas, whenever you try to give reservation to any particular community or any particular group of people mindlessly, it does not serve the purpose. So it has to be on merits. If you have the merit, come on your own legs and stand up for the business. There are large businesses who would want to support you, not only in payment terms but in multiple other ways. But it cannot be a reservation based system. A 45-day payment cycle does not mean anything even if I am paying in 7 days. I usually pay in 10-15 days. But a 45-day gun on my head does not mean that I need to do business with him. It discourages me to do business with such kind of people who are not doing business in the right way. I think the government had gone one extra step last year in the last year budget when they included MSME payments in 43B. Now it's absolutely uncalled for. So it's really draconian, and I think there's a lot of rethink that is required to put that into implementation. It gets applied from 1st of April 24, and we will see a lot of protest and reservations around this. But I really I want to put this point on the table here, that this is definitely not something that is very welcome. And lastly, I think again on the taxation side, the TDS structure needs to radically be improvised. There are thousands of rates from 0.01% to 30% on multiple things. It requires a supercomputer to analyze what rate will get attracted in what scheme, in what instance, and for whom. So I don't know why we can't have a simpler structure like a GST for a simple thing like TDS. I understand the direct taxes the collections have really improved. Kudos to a lot of effort that the government has done. But I think rationalization and radicalization of the TDS structure will improve this compliance even further.
Very notable points on compliance from all of you. The one thing that I got to know from this discussion is like CFOs has a lot to tell about compliance. So that's a great thing. Mr. Kunal, like there are lots of talk in the political corridor as well as in the corridor of finance about 5 trillion economy and like making India the third largest economy by some years. Sir, what kind of blueprint you want to see in this budget in that direction?
See, a simple point. I mean, we are the most populous nation at this point in time, right? And for the most populous nation to be able to harness its demography, what is key is to have employment and is to raise productivity. And the way to do that is to ensure that you spend adequately on health and education, which we are not doing. Public expenditure on health and education is still really quite poor. And I have been raising this issue multiple times. I have not seen any relevant increase in expenditures on this front. And I think that is something that we really cannot continue to defer, because see, some point in time, the demography window will close. Remember, China's demography has started shrinking. China has become old before it became rich. It is still upper middle income economy. Now, we have recently seen a Goldman Sachs report that's talking about 60 million in Indian earning average of $10,000. And they said around 27, 28, it will be 100 million Indians earning $10,000. But remember, at this point in time, the Chinese per capita income is 20% more than that. And we are talking of only 100 million, Indians earning. So the point is, when you're talking of growth, what is critical is, see, at this point in time, we are the fastest growing economy. In a low global growth environment, we are the fastest growing economy. We are the fifth largest. IMF, if you go by IMF forecast, it will be the third largest by around 27 end. So roughly around 28, India will be the third largest economy. But is that good enough? That's the point. I mean, we need to grow faster. So if we are growing, see, I do not see India growing at 7% anytime soon. And India needs to grow at least 8.5% to 9% to make a meaningful dent on poverty and create adequate employment. So yes, the focus should be a mix. Focus should be to ensure that you have a well-rounded development. The rural economy should also come up, because what's happening currently is roughly 30% of the economy is driving the entire economy. I mean, 30% in the sectors that are part of those. So rest are simply riding along for whatever it means. So the point is, we need to have a more well-rounded growth, because otherwise only inequality will increase. So we have a situation where 30%, 35% is growing possibly at double-digit real rates, so 12% odd, but the rest of the economy is growing at an extremely slow pace, and which is not creating adequate jobs. So again, the key is, so even when you're, for example, talking of say manufacturing, despite all of these, benefits or the policy-driven support, services still drives the growth, and it will continue to drive the growth. We had this Make it India policy, and when we announced that we had a share of manufacturing share of 16%, and the aim was to make it to 25% by 2022, but by 2023 it actually fallen below 16%. So I think the most important focus is to ensure we have right kind of people. So when we are formalizing the economy, we are not ensuring that our labor force is also up to the mark. So this is leading to a situation where there's a lot of dichotomy in terms of demand of quality of people and availability of quality of people. I think everything said and done, we should some point in time continue to ensure that we need to spend a lot more on health and education to bring those people up to a level where they can really start contributing. Otherwise, they will be, as the recent data shows, there are a lot of disguised unemployment. People without payment, and in fact, good research by Azim Premji Institute showed that post pandemic, there are two kinds of people who got a lot of employment, so-called employment. One is people who are not getting paid as part of the family job, that they are working in the family farm, and people who have gone for employment, and the remuneration from self-employment is actually much lower now than what was 5-6 years back. When we look at demand for NREGA jobs, it has again started to going up. What it means is there's not adequate amount of employment available. Either not available, or there are not people ready for the kind of employment available. So these are things I think we need to tackle on a fast track basis, because by max by 2045, 2045, 48, our demographic window will close down. And for a societal development, couple of decades mean nothing. We do not have much time. I think those should be the focus to ensure that people do really move up to levels where they can meaningfully contribute. Otherwise, we'll only see growth which will possibly lead to more of inequality and its attendant consequences. So, I mean, I would stop here at that. Of course, for the sectoral policy, there are experts to talk about. But I think the focus should be more on ensuring that the rural sector does well, employment generation happens, wages grows up. I think that is the basic matrix that one should be focusing on. If we are talking of not just 5 trillion economy, we should be talking about 10 trillion economy, an economy that really moves up there.
A very interesting perspective and all notable points you said, Mr. Kunal. Noted. Thank you everyone for joining this discussion and contributing very meaningful points. Thank you so much for watching etcfo.com.